Benjamin Netanyahu has done something many in Washington once swore would never happen again. He has dragged the US back into a Middle Eastern war. The last time this happened was in 2003, the invasion of Iraq. That war was supposed to reshape the region. Its architects in Washington, men like Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, believed they were launching what they proudly called the new American century. Baghdad fell within days and Washington declared victory, but the victory didn't last. What followed was insurgency, chaos, and 20 years of war. For a time, a broad consensus emerged in Washington. The invasion of Iraq had been a catastrophic error, one that must never be repeated. Yet today, the US finds itself drawn back into the very labyrinth Trump once promised to avoid, and the man who led it there is Benjamin Netanyahu. Since Trump returned to power, Netanyahu has worked relentlessly to steer American policy toward confrontation with Iran. The pressure campaign was constant, repeated visits, relentless lobbying, and influence channeled through figures close to Trump's inner circle, most notably his son-in-law Jared Kushner. The message was simple: strike Iran, reshape the Middle East, remove Israel's most powerful adversary. Eventually, the decision was made. Trump authorized military operations against Iran and launched a campaign targeting senior figures in its leadership. But it's already becoming clear that this war will not be quick, and it will certainly not be easy. There will be no Venezuelan scenario here. The war was not triggered by an imminent Iranian attack on American territory. Iran does not possess strategic weapons capable of threatening the US itself, and its nuclear program had already been constrained under the 2015 nuclear agreement between Iran and the world's major powers. That deal imposed strict limits on uranium enrichment and subjected Iran to international monitoring. Iran complied until the US withdrew from the agreement during Trump's first administration. In later negotiations, Tehran even indicated it was willing to reduce enrichment to bare minimum. And only months ago, Trump himself claimed Iran's nuclear capabilities had been obliterated, which raises a simple question. If they were obliterated, why is there a war now to obliterate them, to eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities? For decades, Israel fought its wars while the US provided weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic backing. But formally, those wars were Israel's. The distinction mattered. Even during the Gulf War in the early 1990s, when Saddam Hussein fired Scud missiles at Israel, Washington refused to allow Israel to enter the coalition. Why? Because American leaders wanted Arab states to remain part of the alliance. Israel and the US, of course, coordinated very closely behind the scenes, but the war remained America's war, not a joint one. Today, that line has disappeared. For the first time, Washington and Tel Aviv are fighting the same war openly, side by side. The consequences are already rippling across the Gulf. For decades, the Gulf monarchies built their security strategy around a simple bargain: oil and money in exchange for security. For 60 years, this was the stable equation. Gulf states invested enormous wealth in the American economy. They hosted American bases, and in return, Washington guaranteed stability. But Trump has shattered that equation. He wants the money, he wants the oil, but he's no longer providing the security. In fact, he's now threatening the security of the very states that finance the alliance. During Trump's 2025 Gulf tour, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar pledged gigantic investment commitments worth around $3 trillion over time. Gulf money flowed into American projects, some of it even into ventures linked directly to Trump and his family. Entities tied to the UAE's national security leadership reportedly purchased a 49% stake in the Trump-linked cryptocurrency venture World Liberty Financial in a deal worth around $500 million. Meanwhile, Jared Kushner's investment firm, Affinity Partners, manages billions from Gulf sovereign wealth funds, including a $2 billion commitment from Saudi Arabia. These are not random transactions, they're calculated strategic decisions. One may agree with them or disagree with them, but they form part of a deal, even if it's an unequal one. And Trump has now broken the terms of that deal, because when war arrived at the Gulf's doorstep, the region was not even consulted. Trump has carried out what many in the region see as a double betrayal. First, he launched his war behind the backs of the Gulf states. Without consultation, without warning, he dragged their region into a war they did not want. Then he went further still. He began pressing them to become fodder for the war itself. There's a bitter irony here because the very American bases meant to guarantee Gulf security now place those countries directly in the line of fire. These are not symbolic facilities. They're vast military installations housing thousands of troops, aircraft, command centers and missile systems. And because they exist, Gulf states automatically become targets whenever the US enters a war. In other words, the protector becomes the danger. Instead of shielding the region from conflict, American bases turned the Gulf into the battlefield. A Kuwaiti political analyst recently captured this irony perfectly. He says, people think the Americans are defending us, but today we are the ones defending the Americans. That unease is no longer being expressed only behind closed doors. It has begun to surface publicly. The Emirati businessman Khalaf al-Habtour, close to the Abu Dhabi palace, addressed Donald Trump directly with a question that many in the Gulf are now quietly asking. Who gave you the authority to drag our region into a war with Iran? Did you calculate the collateral damage before pulling the trigger? Those questions capture a growing frustration across the region because Washington did not merely launch a war, it launched it in someone else's neighborhood. And Washington is now going further still. It's pressing Gulf states to join the war itself. Senator Lindsey Graham, who seems to spend more time in Tel Aviv than he does in South Carolina, has been running around urging Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states to enter the conflict. This is the same Lindsey Graham who, as the Wall Street Journal reports, has been busy coaching Netanyahu on how to bend Donald Trump to his wishes on Iran. Now he's touring the region with a mixture of threats and sweet promises. The US gave you weapons, use them, as though those weapons were generous free gifts not paid for with tens of billions of dollars. If you fight Iran, we will protect you, we will sign a security agreement with you. Oh really? So what exactly were all those American bases for? And the billions spent on US military installations across their territory? I thought that was the security agreement, the one that was supposed to guarantee their protection. And recent events have only deepened suspicions across the region. Israeli media circulated claims that the UAE had attacked an Iranian desalination facility. The report was quickly and firmly denied by UAE officials, but the danger was obvious. Such an attack could easily have triggered Iranian retaliation against desalination plants across the Gulf, facilities that provide the vast majority of drinking water in countries like the UAE. For many in the region, the episode looked like a calculated attempt to trick the Gulf into war, which raises a deeper question. Who benefits from chaos in the Middle East? Not the Gulf states, not the Arab world, but there is one country whose strategic thinking has long emphasized a different logic: Israel. For decades, Israeli strategists have argued that when surrounding states weaken, fragment, or collapse, Israel's relative power increases. Chaos for others can become strategic advantage for Israel. Recently, Israeli writer MEE Opinion published an article entitled Sykes-Picot 2026, Time to Redraw the Middle East Map. Arab and Islamic states that present themselves as national states modelled on the West may lose their importance to a model in which the tribe and clan once again become the real units of governance. He wrote, "The inevitable end is already appearing on the horizon." This new chaotic order would not be drawn by diplomats with rulers and fountain pens, he says, but by wars that dismantle existing states and rebuild them from the ruins. Lebanon and Syria, the writer suggested, would be the first laboratories. Well, that vision may strengthen Israel, but it doesn't strengthen the US. For decades, American power in the Middle East rested on stability, on alliances, on the security architecture built around the Gulf. The Gulf is not a marginal theater of American policy. It's one of the pillars of American global influence, central to global energy markets, home to major US military bases, and a major source of investment in the American economy. Now that architecture is being shaken by Trump, and of course China and Russia are watching closely, for them America's renewed entanglement in the Middle East is an opportunity. The deeper Washington sinks into Middle Eastern wars, the more room its rivals gain. And so a strategic paradox is emerging. In trying to serve Israel's agenda, the US may be undermining its own position in the very region that sustains its global influence. For the Gulf states, the lesson is becoming difficult to ignore. The security arrangement meant to protect them may now be exposing them to danger. And in Washington, the central question may soon no longer be about Iran, it will be about Israel, whether implementing its strategy is protecting American interests or quietly eroding them.